All right, for your trig graphs, when you are looking for the different information based on the graph itself, there's a few vocabulary words that we need to go over. So the easiest is the midline. So this red graph corresponds with this trig function over here in red. This is 2 cosine of 3x plus 4. And then this blue graph is going to be this one down here. So first thing we're going to do is we are going to look for the midline of each of these. The midline is exactly what it sounds like. It is the middle of the graph, and it cuts it directly in half horizontally. So in this first one with cosine, the midline is going to be y equals 4, and I'm going to write it as a line. So we would write y equals 4. The amplitude is going to be the distance from the midline, either to the highest point, the peak, or the lowest point. You can count in either direction, it doesn't matter. So if I count from the midline up or down, in this case, I'm going to get an amplitude of 2. The phase shift is how much you move the graph to the left or the right, the parent function. In this case, there is no left or right movement for your transformation. So in this case, your phase shift is equal to 0. The period is going to be how long the wave is before it starts to repeat itself. And so you can take any 2 points on the graph that create one full cycle to get the period. For example, I could start here at pi over 2. I could go, and then I can see where that graph repeats itself. In this case, that would be pi over 2 to, looks like, between pi and 3 pi over 2. So 3 pi over 4. Or you could just simply start here at 0. That's going to be the easiest thing to do for any of them. So if I just simply start at 0 instead, I would go from here, I would cycle out. This is going to be a cosine graph, and then it's going to end here. And this is going to be between pi over 2 and pi. So you would figure out the distance between those two. In this case, this is actually going to be 2 pi over 3 for the period. And then finally, the frequency. The frequency is going to be how many times that wave occurs in a normal 2 pi period. So one complete graph, you're going to count from 0 to 2 pi how much it repeats itself, how many times. So for example, cosine starts here, so I'll go down, I'll come back up. Here's one cycle. I'm going to do another one. Same thing. Here's my second cycle. So there's 1, there's 2, I'll do it one last time, and then there's my third cycle. So in this case, my frequency is going to be 3. So if you want to pause the video and try it on this next one, that's fine. So now for my sine graph, I'll do the exact same thing. Again, the midline is the line that cuts it in half, halfway through, right down the middle. In this case, the midline will now be y equals -1. The amplitude, if I count from the midline up or down, that amplitude is going to be 1. So y equals -1 was the midline. Amplitude was 1. Let's go with phase shift. This time you have to see how much this graph moved left or right, but in order to do that, I'm going to take this part and I'm going to factor out that 1/2 so I can actually see which way this thing went and by how much. In this case, if I take out my GCF of 1/2, I end up with x minus pi. So this tells me I'm going right pi units, which means then my phase shift must be pi over 2, and it's going to be positive because it went to the right. Now, if it happened to be a plus pi over 2 here instead, making it go left pi, then my phase shift would actually be negative pi instead. Next is we'll do frequency next. So for the frequency, I'm going to again go from 0 to 2 pi, and I'm going to look to see how much of that graph has been created. So if I cycle from 0 all the way to 2 pi, that number is definitely less than 1 because I haven't even gotten a full graph just yet. So it's definitely going to be less than 1. And it looks like it's actually only about half of the graph. So in this case, my frequency is going to be 1/2 because there's only 1/2 of the graph between 0 and a normal 2 pi period. So the frequency is 1/2. And then finally, our period. So remember, a period is how far the graph spans before it repeats itself. So in this case, you'll notice that it goes from 0 to 2 pi. We only saw half of it. And then if I look at the other half, if I move to the left just a little bit in Desmos, you'll see that it truly does go from 0 to 2 pi was truly half of it. And then the cycle is going to finish here at 4 pi. So therefore, my period then would be 4 pi units. Okay, and that's your 5 vocabulary words associated with your trig graphs.